So again, we're very, very fortunate to spend some time with him today. If you're logged in, you should be able to see the title slide that states Increasing SOA Efficiency. There was a brief intro earlier regarding live meeting. To briefly recap, we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the session. And as this is a webcast, all audio is muted. You can ask a question by using the Q&A feature located in the upper left toolbar. You can also use the feedback icon, which is located, or the feedback feature, which is located in the upper right toolbar. And lastly, this webcast is being recorded, and we will make it available to you probably in about a week or so when the recording is up and running, and will also be available via the Neudesic website. So at this time, if everybody would make sure that your feedback color is green, that will indicate that we are ready to proceed and move forward. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chad Thomas for our presentation. Chad?
Thank you, Dion. All right, welcome everybody to Increasing SOA Efficiency. We're going to take a look at mapping business processes back to our service orientation offerings today. It's not going to run the full hour. We just wanted to share some morsels that we have found over the last 5, 6, 7 years of doing service orientation at mid and large-sized companies. So one of the things that we feel that is being missed right now is the attention to business process and how it relates to SOA. So we look at our key problem. We feel that the promises of SOA that have been delivered over the last 10 years or so since SOA was first coined was promised ROI, promised increased agility between IT and business, increased alignment between IT and business, and breaking down the process silos that exist within application domains and the way the business uses those application domains. So right now we feel we're kind of at a crossroads with SOA. We've had it around for a while. It's hit some successes in some realms, but not delivered on all of its promises in other realms. And we're kind of trying to decide where's SOA headed right now. Are we going to replace SOA with the next greatest technology? Or are we going to refine SOA and continue to understand it, or are we going to redo it altogether? If you look at respected industry insiders, over the last month or so, there's been some controversial posts on whether SOA is dead or alive, or which direction it's headed. And there's been some very popular discussions around the death of SOA. And I would caution anybody to be careful when proclaiming a particular technology as being dead. I've heard that COBOL and mainframe are going away since I was in college in the early 90s, and I still deal with COBOL and mainframe on a daily basis. So I think you got to be careful when we start saying that SOA is dead. However, there are some problems that need to be addressed, and we're going to look at some of those mappings with business processes. We see that Microsoft and IBM and Oracle and a slew of others are continuing to bolster efforts around SOA, and they're concentrating a lot of their efforts in the actual BPM space. So what we're encouraging clients to do is to consider mapping their business processes to their actual service offerings. Some of the promises can be restored by mapping the services to business processes when we look at the core business process on end-to-end and try to map them back to what we have in our actual technology portfolio. So BPM offerings are starting to mature, as we just discussed in the previous slide. All the major players are involved, and there's a lot of cycles and dollars being thrown at BPM. For many organizations, the concept of business process management is still very new, and there's only a few select partners out there that we actually see that are doing full-blown business process management. A lot of those are people that bought into the early Six Sigma and business process reengineering pieces, and they're actually looking to spread that wealth of information across their entire portfolio, including technology. So we encourage our clients to use caution when looking at BPM and trying to view it as an extension of SOA. They're uniquely different problems and different paradigms, and we often say that they're complementary in nature and not extensions of one another. So if you're starting your business process management as an extension of your SOA efforts, we strongly recommend that you back up, take a look at your business processes in a different light. Don't look at them in a technology light. Look at them in a business understanding light. The result of mapping business processes to your actual service orientation offerings is better design and improved alignment And we're also seeing a lot of increased value from our customers as well as they have time to market and business goodwill. And we'll drill into each one of these in a little bit. So starting with better designed services, we want to understand how the business operates before we start offering a whole bunch of services out into the service repository. So if we don't understand how our business operates on a day-to-day basis and what their problem concerns are, it's very hard to meet that initial promise of SOA of delivering value and crossing the IT divide. So we recognize that understanding business processes is a key area in understanding what services to publish to our repository. It's not the only source. We have other places like domain experts, business analysts that work in a particular subject matter. We also have developers that deal with technology concerns. So when we look at business processes as a source of developing services, we look at it in this fashion that you see on the graphic here, where I look at a business process as a series of steps that need to happen for the process to complete, and then I look down to my service layer, and this is known as top-down design for service orientation. Now, whether you use business processes for your top-down design or your top-down design comes from just the business partner and the CEO and the necessary operations officers that are developing the strategic initiative, it doesn't really matter. If it's coming from the business, it's definitely a top-down approach. So what we're saying is look at the top-down. Right? IT, if they go off and develop these service offerings in their service orientation all alone, they often provide very little value to the actual line of business. So we take the line of business background and say, hey, look what we built, and they look at us and just kind of shake their head with a bitter grin on their face. So I once worked on an initiative where we spent 16 months developing service-oriented architecture, and IT was the key driver and the single source for information as to what services we were going to develop. And we had a meeting scheduled with senior management after all of our work was completed and tested and thought out, and we showed them what we had built, and they were quite angry. The reason for their anger was they didn't see how the services that we had ponied up helped them do their job. So when we thought of the services that we offered, we thought of things like logging and caching, process integration, having our loan portfolio talk to our customer service portfolio. They didn't see the value in that. Right? We solved the problems and our pain points from our point of view. From their point of view, they were more concerned with loan onboarding, escrow analysis, payment processing, and they had a different view. Right? So that they're same problems, but different ways of looking at it. Different sides of the same coin. So if you leave it up to developers and architects in the technology world, excuse me, you'll be left with what we are calling a JBoss architecture. It's just a bunch of web services, the acronym behind JBoss. And it's a failure of what we would call a bottom-up approach. Right, we still haven't realized on any of the main promises of SOA because we have not engaged our business partners. We might have engaged them on actual business requirements for a particular application silo, but we haven't engaged them in the total enterprise architecture, total architecture in delivering SOA and how it relates to their world from their view. So when we do the IT-driven approach, right, we still have valuable services. There are still things that we need to solve on a day-to-day basis. Right? Logging is definitely a valuable thing for us. However, it's not an immediate concern to the business. Right? It's a little too fine-grained for them to understand and appreciate. So services come in many forms, and I think that was the crucial moment that we had in understanding, our missteps, was that there's a taxonomy of services. Right? We have services that are of value to technology, like utilities like logging, integration pieces, but there's also services that have a more business flavor to them, and those business services are often composed of one or more of the fine-grained services and usually some unique one-off stuff that we haven't really thought of from an IT discipline. So we encourage our clients to be very careful in using the top-down approach, as it can lead to an over-engineering or a boil-the-ocean approach, and we kick off a whole lot of requirements and processes, and we generate a lot of documents and build out a lot of architecture, but at the end of the day, we're 7-8 months into the project and we've yet to deliver any services. So the top-down approach is longer development times, and it's very risky from the over-engineering standpoint. So keep the business process mapping in mind when you're building your services, but don't let it be your sole guiding principle in how to design your service and what services you're offering. So a natural extension of involving your business with designing of your services is improved alignment. Right? And I think this is probably the single most important thing that we see clients missing when taking on service-oriented initiatives, is the alignment process is not happening. Right? We develop a whole bunch of services and we look really neat on paper, and we've developed a lot of things, and we're doing a lot of the cool technology stuff. We're using BizTalk, we're using WCF, it's talking to web methods and Java underneath the covers, but the alignment is not happening. So when we go through these mapping exercises, the result of mapping is alignment. Right? It's a direct output of the mapping exercise. As we said earlier, the business process and business engineering are primary line of business concerns. So if we can understand their perspective on how we're delivering things, we can better offer our service orientation architecture to better meet their needs and align with what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. So mapping naturally crosses the divide between IT and technology. So I'm currently running a SOA project right now where we started off the project as Neudesic, engaging the LOB for input up front. For those who don't know, LOB is line of business. So we reach out to the line of business up front, and the technology was kind of scratching their heads and said, you know, hey, we've already developed this plan. Here's the plan. And we haven't worked back to the business, but this is what we need to do. This is our tactical objectives. So we took a look at it, we scrapped the plan, and we sat down with the business and started to understand how they work things. And as we worked with IT and the business, we realized that they had never sat down in the same room together and actually planned things from a high level. Right? Requirements are thrown over a wall by being handed off to business analysts, and IT went off to build things to spec. And they often built things exactly as the line of business told them to. So there was no real leadership other than the technology department executing the task being given to them from the line of business. There was no design, there was no architecture, there was no forethought in bridging day-to-day business steps to what was in the service portfolio. And as a result, they have hundreds of applications spread out across their environment. Some of them in the mainframe, some of them in ASP.NET, some of them in SharePoint, some of them in Java. And it's really tough for different business divisions to understand where they need to go to get what information to execute one steps. So we came in and we looked at the IT schedule, and we decided not to publish it. We sat down and worked with the IT and LOBs to flesh out the core tasks that they wanted to achieve. And we looked at it on a process-by-process basis. And when we started out with a process, we kept it very simple. We looked at two core processes and started mapping them out. And it took us the better part of two days to look at a single business process. And the aha moment was when, in the latter part of the second day, we realized that, you know what, the process we're designing right now is totally irrelevant. Right? The process is changing in 6 months as of July 1st. It was over the winter time, over winter break. In July 1st, the particular clients that they had in their portfolio that needed to meet this objective were upgrading to a new system. So IT was spending lots of efforts and lots of cycles in eliminating pain points that were unique to IT. By the time they got it published and up and out the door, there was no value back to the business process because that business process was changing. So it was kind of a disconnect and very staggering to us and very, very embarrassing to several people within the client realm. And we changed our scope a little bit, dropped back, and now we're doing different strategic initiatives. Right? We're pursuing business processes that are more meaningful, pain points that are on the business side of the house and not on the IT side of the house. So our tactical solutions now become our strategic solutions. So as we look at that alignment, we look at business processes developing certain services. We look at certain services coming out of application integration and just certain things that need to happen within our overall IT ecosystem. Alignment happens when both the IT and the business invest in that service repository. So if you look at my green band, that's what we're calling our service repository, and it's a collection of offerings we've made in our service-oriented architecture, driven both from the application boundary in IT in blue and the process boundaries delivered by our line of business partners in the orangish yellow. So in this diagram, we can think of the services in the top part of the green piece, the upper level services, as being those delivered from the processes, right? And we look at, there's a composition. So one of those services in the top layer might call one or more services in the bottom layer that are processed by the actual application. So we're looking at our service portfolio, we're looking at the granularity that we need on the application side of things, and we're composing functionality based on how the business uses those service assets in the process side of things. So increased value. Increased value is something that every IT shop is being held to, especially as the economy tightens up. Right? And we argue that the really only way to get value out of a service-oriented architecture is through service reuse and agility. Right? Reusing services and creating process agility is the value proposition. We need to better understand within the business what is in the service repository. Until the business actually understands what we're offering from the IT side of the house to make their job easier, can they really start to understand their business processes and how to stitch new business processes together. So what we're trying to do is put the onus of design onto our business partners. They understand how they use things on a day-to-day basis. It's our job to make the access to those day-to-day processes easier. So one of the reasons we want to push the reuse story back into the business side of the house is just the sheer nature of developers. Right? I've worked with developers for the last 10 years. I'm a developer myself, and I know that the developer tendency is to continually rebuild. Right? And there's acronyms all over the IT world on rebuilding something. Right? Why should I use somebody else's stuff when I can build my own? Developers are craftsmen, and the more they keep writing code, and the better they feel. So the encouragement for reuse is very seldom something that you'll find in developers. They have to be incentivized to actually pursue the reuse story. So we also think that the business actually thinks differently when they look at new processes or changing processes, when they look at the prism of the current service offerings that are being published by technology. So it increases the alignment, but it also enhances the value proposition. They're now reusing existing services, and they're able to change a lot more nimbly. Right? It's crucial for IT to demonstrate both tangible value and intangible value. And what I mean by tangible value is the acronyms that you see traditionally within technology, total cost of ownership, return on investment, and the like, where we're actually looking at sheer numbers and saying, hey, IT is of value, IT is not of value. I think a bigger, more unspoken value proposition is that of goodwill and leadership. So if you look at some of the maturity models around SOA and business process management, the more mature upper reaches of that paradigm are, is technology a leader? Do they bring business insight and business acumen to the discussion, or are they just reacting to the state of the current day? And I think the key part for us as technologists is to be able to be leaders, not just within the technology sphere, but in the complete operational sector. So I'm going to rant on ROI just for a quick second. Right? I just came off a major project for a major financial institution on Wall Street, and we were obsessed with ROI. It was a huge top-down shop, and I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but they're learning lessons that I think we all can benefit from. We only looked at ROI as a sheer metric of what we were delivering. We did not look at any of the goodwill that was being established, any of the leadership, and the trust from the actual line of business. The line of business was responsible for delivering the budget, delivering the dollars. They decided how many dollars they were going to throw at IT in the following budget sector. And we kicked off this big giant process, and we built a lot of stuff, and there was very little return on investment because we weren't done building the system that we started off to build. So when we look at ROI in that light, there was a lot of investment, very little return, and very little value proposition. And I started thinking about this as I was watching the Super Bowl, right? Value, when measured in terms of ROI, is very gray. It's very arbitrary. When we look at how we measure first downs in a football game, we see that there are sticks on the sidelines that are exactly 10 yards long. However, when we look out on the field and we look at where the referees put the ball in a very arbitrary spot. Sometimes it's where the guy's knee hit the ground. Sometimes it's where his shoulder hit the ground. We want to make sure that we're matching, specific disciplines up with one another. I can't use a very specific measuring stick on a very arbitrary system. So that return is very arbitrary in IT. So we want to be very careful in using ROI when measuring the value of our service-oriented offerings. So our final note on that is value is often very immeasurable. Right? Perception is reality. If I'm perceived to be of value to my business partners through giving them agility and giving them service reuse, so I'm not redesigning things, the better off we are. So we'll look at this piece, and it's very similar to the slide we looked up above, where we had the processes and the services in the application. Business processes have different rates of change than services. They have different life cycles than services. I can often have a business process that might change 4 or 5 times in a given year, and the underlying services that access or that are provided by those processes don't change at all. For example, look at tax and escrow for a loan department. If I'm accruing tax and escrow throughout the year, 10 times a year, I'm taking tax and escrow and collecting it on my mortgage payments. 2 times a year, I'm actually making an escrow payment out to the actual county or state institution that gets the money. So the business process changes depending on the timing and the nature of things. I once worked in an auto loan financing agency, and they had lots of deals that they ran at the end of the year as they rolled off new auto loans or new automobiles to make way for the new auto for 2009, say. So in that particular instance, we had business processes that changed and came in at September 1st of every year, and they rolled off December 31st every year. So we decoupled the business process behind funding a loan and calculating the rate from the actual services underneath that actually bore the loan and kicked the automobile into play. So at a different auto finance company I worked at, we had a situation where we built a document repository, and the back end of it was FileNet. And we did a series of business process exercises, and we realized from working with our business, it was a very mature shop. They had their business processes and their service orientation together. And we after going through several iterations, we realized that we need to have services around our document repository to make sure the documents matched up with the leases at lease time. And the unique thing that we did here is we needed to have that document repository ID embedded into the actual lease system. So we would often create an empty shell in the document repository that would be a container for the documents, and we would get the document ID back out through a web service and publish that into our leasing engine. Well, the business comes back to us in about a year's time and says, we're not going to do our own document scans anymore. And at the time, they were using high-valued employees to scan documents into a PDF form and load them into this document repository with a file upload utility that we wrote. So what we did was we outsourced it. We took the business process. We used a firm called GlobalFax. It's very popular in doing the faxing and document scanning. We provided them a front end, a web service over HTTP that they could upload documents to. So the entire business process was removed from internal to external outsourced provider. At the same time, our underlying services did not change. So again, we had decoupled the process layer and the actual movement of pieces around our system from how documents get into the system. So that decoupling layer allowed our business unit to realize more value in terms of lowering cost and increased process agility without having to rewrite a whole bunch of steps within our technology offering. They came in and changed a couple pieces in Visio. We uploaded it to BizTalk, and the change was made, and off we went. So process agility is a huge, huge way to get increased value out of your service orientation offerings. Now we'll spend a couple slides on getting started. Right? Getting started with mapping business processes to your actual service orientation. Right? It's not a very complicated exercise. You can do it in Visio. Visio provides you with a number of business process engineering templates. There are a number of stuff out on the web where you can look at business process reengineering. You can borrow from Six Sigma or Total Quality Management. Sometimes lean manufacturing inspires people. But the key part is getting your business stakeholders involved. So if we look at this reference architecture here, this is similar to how we look at a classic n-tiered application, although we're going to have some caveats here that we're going to throw out. But if you look at this reference architecture, we have the front end where I might have a web portal that faces my external clients. I might have back office users that work directly with my IT systems, and I might have an automated system, for example, an IVR, or it might be externally facing web services that deal with clients outside of my DMZ. Underneath the covers, I have business processes modeled and developed by working with my business partners, and we've developed all the step execution workflows and state machines and whatnot. I've developed my services to drive them and interface and work with my applications, not necessarily on a one-to-one basis. Right, our key step is the middle-out approach. Right? We promote middle-out approach development for service-oriented architecture with every client we work with. We talked earlier about top-down, where I drive from the process layer to what services I worked with. We also talked a little bit about publishing services into my service repository as a work from IT initiative. If we start at the middle-out approach, we're working in both directions. Right? And there tends to be a habit of working in both directions, but working on every single process and every single application and every single service that you can possibly work on. We recommend not doing that. We encourage our clients to start small, take a single business process, maybe not necessarily a mission-critical one, something that's low-hanging fruit that you can get a quick win from. Map that business process to existing services in your repository, or if you're yet to move down a service-oriented architecture, start flushing out your services based on some of the simple steps that you see in your processes. However, use caution, because we don't have a one-to-one mapping between steps in our business process workflow and our service offering. I might have a step that is manual intervention that has no services whatsoever. I might have a step that actually calls several services, and then depending on the result of those services, calls an alternative chain in my business process. So there's not a one-to-one relationship between processes and steps. Sometimes it's one-to-many, sometimes it's many-to-one, sometimes it's zero-to-one. So be careful in that regard. If we start just doing single processes, single steps, we start to look again like mainframe and the old procedural problems that we had arise out of the 80s and 90s that gave us object-oriented programming. But at the same time of starting small, you want to think big. Right? You want to think with the end state in mind. Not necessarily with this particular iteration, but what's going to happen as a result of your decisions a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Use a 30,000-foot view while you're working on your day-to-day grind. And that'll help start to flush out some of your governance and policy procedures. Right? When you start looking at some of the rules that you're going to set up within your service-oriented architecture, you're going to flush those out in your early rounds in your middle-out approach. We're going to develop the service, we're going to refine the service, we're going to publish the service, we're going to consume it, and then we're going to start all over again. And that might be based on new business processes, that might be based on existing business processes, it might be based on finding errors within your program. But that is the approach that we are pushing for a middle-out style of development. So the other thing we want to throw out is BPM mapping is really only one technique for squeezing efficiency out of your service-oriented architecture. Right? It's not the only bullet in the gun, so to speak. Right? We're giving webcasts throughout the year on governance, on enterprise service buses, properly using patterns. Business process management at most is going to squeeze an extra 10-20% efficiency out of your overall service-oriented offerings. Right? It's not the end game. If you look at the BPM offering from Microsoft, if you were to get on their website and look at the results of their SOA BPM conference or try to find what tools that they offer for business process management, they don't have a unique tool that says, hey, this is Microsoft BPM. Right? That is not fully baked into their offering right now. We have things on the front end that have workflowing capabilities, right? Whether I'm using MOS, Microsoft Office SharePoint Server has workflowing capabilities. I have the ability to use Windows Workflow as part of the Microsoft .NET stack to develop business processes and model them in a somewhat visual manner. At a little more higher tech level, I have more Microsoft .NET offerings in the workflow stack, and in developing custom workflows and that kind of like. I also have Microsoft BizTalk Server. 2006 on up to the new beta that's out for 2009 has the ability to use orchestrations and compose several surfaces into a single service and offer that up as a business process management tool. And the BizTalk Server provides some very neat monitoring and activity tracking pieces to it as well. So I can actually look at how a service is running, and based on its internal running mechanisms, actually do other things. I can do what we call compensation. If I have an error within my service, I might not want to throw an error per se, but I might want to send a call out to a rep and have it manually repaired so our customer out on the far end doesn't see that we actually had an internal error. So, and deeper into the services layer, when I'm actually offering up services to my business processes, staying within the Microsoft .NET stack, I have Windows Communication Foundation, which is basically a foundation for writing services and publish them and send them out to other applications or other channels. The BizTalk Server supports WCF. It also allows us to tap into other facilities. I have a series of line of business connectors that allows me to connect to applications and expose them as web services and actually orchestrate over top of them in my process layer. So Microsoft doesn't really call BizTalk Server a BPM tool. You will hear it called a process server. You'll hear it called an enterprise application server, but it's not a full-blown BPM tool. So what Microsoft does in that BPM space is let me back up one slide, sorry about that. They offer the tools out there for developers and partners to go off and roll their own right now. They partner with several people that we also partner with here at Neudesic, such as Metastorm, K2, and SOA Software. We're more of a enterprise service bus, underneath the cover service orientation firm. We rely on partners to actually deliver the BPM story for us. If you look at the future of Microsoft, however, they're kind of taking a different approach, and they haven't made it completely public as to the direction they're headed with BPM. However, there are some themes out there that came out of the last SOA BPM conference that they held last week in Redmond. One of those is increased modeling tools, and they've made no secrets about what they're trying to achieve with Oslo, and some of the modeling that's going on within there, and that's been released out in beta form for about 6 months now. One of the other themes is better process tools, and you're going to see enhancements to the Windows Workflow Foundation, enhancements to BizTalk with respect to the rules engine and the way it handles orchestrations, and you're going to see increased offerings through things like Performance Point and SharePoint, so they can continue with the theme of a people-ready business and offer up business process, service orientation, real-time key performance indicators, all in a theoretical portfolio that we can all use to drive our business and increase our operational efficiency. So those are some of the things that we're seeing right now in a service-oriented architecture and how we're managing that and tying back to business process management. Today's conversation wasn't a deep walk into BPM and SOA mapping. If you would like to discuss in depth some of the things that we can do for you, I encourage you to contact Neudesic and Dion. We'll turn it over to questions now, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Chad. And I think this presentation highlights where we're all at this point as far as providing value not only in our work that we do every day, but what initiatives are we a part of, and how can we make those initiatives function and actually provide real tangible value. Maybe not the ROI like you were talking about, but what kind of business value are we delivering to our stakeholders on a daily basis? And One thing I'd like to ask you is, can you relay with us, I know you had definitely given us some examples throughout the presentation, but can you give us a success story of a SOA initiative that you have worked on in the past?
Yeah, I got two primary ones that really come to mind. The work we did with Chase Home Finance. We started off with developing a lot of services, and that was kind of the feedback we got, where we built a lot of technology-driven services around logging, caching, et cetera. And we come back to the business, and they don't really see the business value. So once we started turning the corner there and delivering services that actually met to the business processes that was their pain point, the thumb in their, or the thorn in their thumb.
Yeah.
So once we started hitting on those, it really changed the way the business thought about their day-to-day offerings. Right? They often came to us prior to that day or that week with, hey, we need to have X, Y, and Z. And I think the thing that they were doing there most guilty of, and no fault of their own, is designing how they thought the system should work, right? Without a real understanding of what is truly capable. So there was definitely a mismatch there in the way we were understanding each other prior to that day. So that was a big one for us. That was a major turning point when we realized, wow, there's an actual hierarchy and a taxonomy to services and what different services do. And I would say the other one was BMW, financial services. BMW is a unique animal in that they, being a German-driven firm, almost everybody in the upper echelons there is of German descent. Almost everybody is a doctor that is in leadership roles at BMW. So they put a lot of emphasis in educating and training and that kind of like. And it's very uniquely different than what I see out of corporate America. Right? There was a much higher incentive to actually do service reuse. Right? So that was the example I gave you, where we actually put a service layer around the repository. It's a very mature shop. They were doing BPM and SOA mapping, back in 2003, before a lot of people really even thought about BPM and SOA. They were very, very disciplined shop. And it just culturally, they were quite a bit different to work for. So those are the two biggest successes, I would say, that we've delivered on.
Very nice. And the other question too is, these projects being a success, but where was the best starting point? And maybe not specifically to those two examples, but just in general, what's a good place to start?
I prefer to start with a single business process, maybe even within a single application. And again, I want to stress to be careful on taking an application-centric view into pursuing a SOA initiative, because it leads to the siloed thinking that created the initial problems that SOA is trying to solve to begin with. But taking a business process and decomposing it, we've done this several times with Microsoft in different design sessions and some of our own internal SOA assessments that we've done for clients, where we sit them down and we walk them through, and just more playing the role of Socrates and asking them questions about how their day-to-day business runs. Do they start to understand and look at the way they do things quite a bit differently? We did a session for Wells Fargo in the summer, and they came out of the session with a whole different understanding on how they process trades on the back end, coming from Europe and coming from Asia. They thought about how they had always done things and a lot of the manual steps, and hadn't really thought about how they could automate a lot of those pieces, and how they were oftentimes working against themselves when doing their day-to-day operations.
Absolutely. It's amazing how nice it is to rethink certain things and get a different perspective going through some of those processes.
But yeah, absolutely. But start with a single process. Don't try to do more than one process. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. Right? You get too much visibility, and your project's more likely to fail. We'll have people competing against you, so aware of the political landscape as well.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I think that wraps up our webcast for today. And And again, my name is Dion Mishler. If you have any questions, Chad, could you advance that? Thank you. Please feel free to contact me via email and or you could reach us via our 800 number. We'll be happy to answer any additional questions you might have. We have plenty of these conversations with current customers, with different organizations around SOA and being efficient in mapping to business processes and things of that nature. So we will definitely be happy to have the conversation with you and your team in whatever capacity makes sense for your organization. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. We appreciate your time and look forward to further conversations with you down the road. Thank you.
Thank you.